Welcome everyone in your respective parts of the world. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to this webinar that is organized by Impact Institute from ESG to impact as a hidden value driver for banks. I'm glad you're all joining. I see that there are still some people coming in. Welcome everyone. Let me start introducing you too. First, myself. I'm your presenter of the day. My name is Yvonne Lang. I'm a program developer at Circle. Circle is an initiative of the ABN AMRO Bank, and our purpose is to accelerate the shift towards a more sustainable economy. And we do that by focusing especially on financial economic change. So I'm really, really excited we are having this webinar today. Let me also introduce you to my co-host of today, Arjen Uding, principal at Impact Institute. Hi, Arjen. Maybe you can show yourself already.
Hi,
and wave.
That's me.
Hi. Thanks. Arjen, we will hear of you a little bit more later in this program.
Yeah.
First, before we start, let me also share some rules of this webinar with you so we can run through the program smoothly. I don't hear anything, so it works at the moment, but please make sure that you keep mute yourself unless you're saying something. Also, you can turn on or off your camera. We really like to see you, so you just leave it on if you like. This program will be recorded, so be aware of that. For the people who cannot join us now, we will also broadcast this program later today at 6. One of the most pressing questions that we always get in the beginning is, are the slides shared afterwards? Yes, Impact Institute will send you an email afterwards and share the slides and all materials that you will hear about today. We do have a chat. It is a chat that will also refer your questions towards us, and we will send them back with some answers. Well, we will answer them in the Q&A later on. So please ask your questions in the chat and also include the name of the speaker if you have a specific question to the speaker. That helps us directing your question towards the right person. So I hope that I didn't forget anything, otherwise I'll get back to it later. But I would also like to show you that we do have some pretty cool speakers today. We have Herman Mulder of the Impact Economy Foundation, my colleague Tjerd Krumpelman from ABN AMRO, and Mikkel Larsen calling in from Singapore from the DBS Bank. Welcome to you guys. Also, we do have a team of Impact Institute that will share a little bit more about their work with you. Adrian and Arjen, you've already seen, and Megan. Welcome to all of you. Also want to give you a brief overview about our program today. We will let Herman start setting the scene by sharing with us his long and winding road towards sustainable banking. I'm super curious about that. After that, as I just mentioned, Adrian, Megan, and Arjen will share a little bit more about their work and what value can mean as impact for banks. And after that, Tjerd and Mikkel will share their business practices or their experiences from practice with us. I'm sure that they will have lots to tell. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Herman. Maybe you can come in and tell us a little bit about this long and winding road.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, and a warm welcome to everyone on this very stormy and rainy day here in Amsterdam. There have been 2 events in the last couple of months which are particularly interesting to me. One was in April, when the oil price sunk to negative territory, or even, I would say, $1 a barrel. And that brought me full circle, Yvonne. Because when I started my career in 1972, the oil price was $1 per barrel. So that was a striking moment for me, that the winding road of the oil price and the role of banking during that age has been quite interesting. The second moment of truth was that 4 days ago, we recognized that Earth Overshoot Day was the 22nd of August. And when I started my career in 1972, it was still the 10th of December, 1970. So my generation, me, have made the impact which we're now trying to undo. First slide, please. And this long and winding road is indeed something we should address. I had 26 years of making impact. And since 1998, when I had my wake-up call, I started to contribute to undoing the impact which we made on society and on nature. So the last 22 years, you can see that a lot of developments have taken place. In the beginning, there was no road. Everyone was pre-ESG, let alone impact, positive impact on society. And it started all around the change of the millennium, as you can see from this graph, that some initiatives were taken, which were early signs of the business and also some governments to start improving practice. Particularly important moments were, I would say, the Equator Principles, which was the first voluntary agreement between initially 12 banks. Now it's about 120 banks to state collectively, we are not competing on values. We are competing on price, on structure, but the values, there's a baseline we should all adhere to. And these were the 12 largest project financing banks in the world. And the Equator Principles, some have some practice, but as we all know, since then, a lot of initiatives have been taken. And I would commend all those who have now been part of the Principles for Responsible Banking, which was signed and launched last year, which I think is a real great initiative. As you can see from the graph, in 2011, the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprise was a particularly important moment, because that was an encouragement by governments, which at that point in time still had a light touch of crowding in the financial sector and the business sector into ESG. But it was there, and the OECD guidelines and the UN Guiding Principles for Human Rights were milestones which triggered a lot of initiatives since then. But it is all related to do no harm. In 2015, we had another, and that is, of course, 2015 was a watershed year in many respects. It started in Addis Ababa. It was thereafter in New York with the SDGs. And of course, then we had the Paris Climate Agreement. And that was the beginning of not only addressing the harm, but also in particular with the SDGs, the doing good and well. And I think that is the agenda we're working on. And as you can see from the chart, there's a lot of initiatives. And one of the challenges we all have is, and the governments should play a role in that, how are we going to bring all the ideas, the standards, the processes, how can we bring that all together? And I think that is one of the big opportunities and challenges in this period. Of course, we have in the last couple of months, you can say the worst of times and the best of times. COVID-19 is something which has really affected our lives. Unlike the GFC in 2007, 2008, it was not initiated in the financial sector or in the real economy. It was exogenous, but clearly the impacts on all of us have been quite seriously, and will be lasting. It will have lasting effects. I sometimes say, no planet, no people, no prosperity, or no profit. And I think this is a moment for all of us to say this is the opportunity to tighten our discipline, to condition our operations and our lending by governments, but also by business, to say we need to really, with the scarce resources we have, we need to focus on undoing the negative impacts and also create new business cases and positive impacts. And of course, that is an important message for the financial sector. So COVID-19 is a unique opportunity for us now to regroup, reset, and rebuild. And that is the message I hope will be picked up by business, the financial sector, and by governments. Next slide, please. what does it mean for the financial sector? As someone who has lived the pre-ESG era, who has lived the global financial crisis in 2007, and also seeing now the aftermath of that, you can see that the financial sector has been at the forefront of making directly or indirectly negative impacts, but in my view should now also be in the forefront as a server of the society and its stakeholders in undoing the negative impacts and pursuing the positive impacts. Because I would say the worst of times and the best of times, the SDGs to me, but the whole environment in which we're living is sad and a lot of concerns, but it's also a fantastic and amazing period to realize the business case which underlie the SDGs. And I think the impact economy initiatives, and particularly for the financial sector, is pretty important right now to help our stakeholders, our clients in particular, re-energize our staff within the banking community or the financial sector, but also crowd in the government to help us as banks to be much more at the forefront of the stewardship for a better world and a better society. I sometimes say that the EBA guidelines, which identify in the banking sector 3 lines of defense, business sector is the first line of defense. It is very much compliance driven. I think there is an opportunity and even a necessity to redefine the first line of defense, the business line of the banks, to be also the first line of offense or of stewardship to create a better world. And I think the impact economy approach and also the impact weighted accounts approach from Harvard Business School, one of the partners in this working group, are extremely important, innovative, forward-looking methodologies to help the banking sector to play that active role. So what do we need to do? Core purpose, long-term value creation for all stakeholders, risk, return and impact, a smarter and transparent approach. We should, as financial sector, be constructive social activists, speak louder, and we must push harder with our clients to help them to create a better future for them and also for society. Thank you very much, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Herman. I see that we are having a nice and packed program. I'm sure that there will be questions later on, but I would like to hand over immediately to you, Adrian, actually. Could you please come in?
Of course. Can you hear me?
Your amazing work.
Yes. So I have the pleasure to, in a brief moment, tell something about what we do at Impact Institute. Yes. So at Impact Institute, we see as one of the greatest opportunities of the 21st century, the realization of the impact economy. And that is an economy in which work, entrepreneurship, and technology engender a better world. So our mission is to empower organizations to realize this impact economy by providing them the means needed to measure, report, and manage impact. So we work with businesses, governments, and nonprofits, where we focus on sectors with high positive and negative externalities, such as food and agriculture, financial services, energy, infrastructure, and transport. So we're based in Europe, but also work in Asia, the Americas, and Africa. So why do we do this? So we see that there are essentially 2 ways to make profit. One is to extract value from society and give that to shareholders. So you could also call that the stealing the pie business model. And the second one is to create value to society and give a fair share of the extra value to shareholders. So in a way that is the enlarging the pie business model. Now, it is still very much possible to make money by extracting value. Extreme example is tobacco. However, it is also possible, fortunately, to make money by creating value. And as Impact Institute, we want to enable businesses to implement a business strategy around value creation, a profitable business strategy around value creation. So as society is getting more transparent, more interconnected, and more politicized in good and bad ways, externalities or impacts as CO2, biodiversity, public health, and discrimination are increasingly business relevant. Hence, value extracting business models are getting less attractive and value creating ones more attractive. However, creating societal value requires businesses to manage their impacts, which in our experience, they find quite hard. So what they need for that, and typically do not have yet, is data, systems, know-how, but also an ability to adapt. So we try to fill that gap by software. So for banks, for example, we offer the Bank Impact Software Tool, a software platform to measure the impact of banks. In terms of data, we offer the Global Impact Database. That is the first multi-capital impact database worldwide, offering quantified and monetized impact estimates for each country and sector on 5 capitals. Education, so impact is a new discipline and people need to acquire new competencies, both technical and managerial. And we provide training and education to re-educate businesses and their professionals. And finally, transformation. We provide consulting services to help organizations in their impact journeys, getting them from A to B. They can be small journeys, a first impact pilot, to large journeys such as implementing an impact strategy. Now here we definitely do not have the magic bullet. Impact is new, it's exciting and challenging. We do have relatively quite a lot of experience of what works and doesn't work. So that is us in a nutshell. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Megan Rue, one of our analysts.
Hello, thank you, Adrian. I will chat a little bit about ESG and look at why ESG considerations in themselves are not entirely sufficient for companies or banks. Although I'm sure most of you are aware and understand a little bit about what ESGs are, or a lot about what ESG is, I think it's good to first get on the same page about what we mean by ESG. So ESG is about incorporating environmental, social, and governance considerations into corporate management, business decisions, and investor portfolio choices. So ESG factors are assessed using non-financial data on environmental issues such as carbon emissions, social issues like employee satisfaction, and governance attributes like board structure or governance policies. Along with the global trend towards sustainability, ESG measurement and reporting has become more popular, and these issues are increasingly topical and salient, especially as a growing portion of firm value is believed to lie in intangible assets. But is ESG incorporation sufficient? While the focus on sustainability and corporate social responsibility is of course positive, ESG ratings have a couple of shortcomings. The first is that ESG metrics such as carbon emissions, for example, or workplace diversity are not by themselves directly comparable. As a result, this can make making decisions or trade-offs or trying to measure your progress on environmental and social issues quite difficult. Secondly, many ESG metrics focus on activities, for example, having a policy in place for renewable energy consumption and or inputs and outputs like the amount of a portfolio that is invested sustainably. So they focus on these rather than considering or measuring the effect of these inputs, activities, and outputs, or in other words, the impact of them. However, impact is what ultimately affects the bank's stakeholders. I think lastly, there's the problem that ESG ratings can suffer from subjectivity and inconsistency. Results from a paper published recently by MIT Sloan reveal that ESG ratings from different agencies can diverge widely. I will now delve a little bit deeper into this last point and explain why that might be the case. So as mentioned, there's big divergence. So one company can score very well by one rating agency and very poorly on another rating agency. And the correlation, there's low correlation between the ratings of different ESG raters. So on average, the correlation is 0.6. For comparison, for credit rating agencies, the correlation for credit ratings is 0.99. This divergence comes from 3 main areas, according to this research paper. The first is scoping. So there's little consensus about which ESG metrics are most material, and metrics that are selected for measurement are usually influenced by the transparency choices of the organization themselves. And this raises concerns about potential for cherry-picking metrics and greenwashing. Another one is weight. An ESG rating combines a variety of metrics into one overall score for the organization. But because these metrics, like I mentioned before, aren't directly comparable, they are weighted and aggregated using some sort of linear combination. And there are often different views on what is most important, which can lead to different end values. Lastly, one of the main points of divergence, according to the study, regards the measurements of these attributes. There are different measurement techniques exist, and very different indicators can be used to measure the same attributes. The results of these limitations are metrics, which can be subjective and inconclusive in terms of helping us to understand the value created by banks for its stakeholders. And it is also difficult to use these metrics for decision-making or sound, sustainable investing decisions, because it's unclear what exactly the metrics mean, what they represent, and how to incorporate them with financials. What we need is to move towards methods and metrics which provide more credible information on the effects of companies' actions and their activities on the stakeholders. So what effect does it have on people on the planet? Something ideally which is objective and quantitative and can provide complete and comparable impact data, which can be used to help with decision making. And as Adrian mentioned, impact measurements is still a young science, and so it's imperfect with some differences in exact measurement methods and techniques, but it meets the necessary criteria. I will now hand over to my colleague Arjen, who will tell you more about impact and IPNL and why this is also important. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, thank you. I will tell you a little bit more about impact and how it can reveal the hidden value of banks. And as we mentioned in the invite for this webinar, we will publish today a new research paper around impact measurement evaluation for banks. And I will highlight a few items and elements of this report in this presentation. So primarily why banks should measure their impact and how it addresses some of these shortcomings of ESG. What is impact? So what are we actually talking about? What is the integrated profit and loss account? And what is the challenge in particular for banks given their complicated value chains? Our report will be made available on our website, so we will share the download link in the email afterwards. What we've seen is that, and Adrian and Herman have mentioned it, that historically banks have not measured their most important value driver. So the focus was mostly on measuring shareholder value, which is just for one particular stakeholder, i.e. the investors, right? This was mainly for two reasons. One is that it was not needed. Profit today was a good proxy of profit tomorrow. And it was also not technically possible to measure the value for different stakeholders in society. But as we see, like the ever-changing environment in society and economy, banks need to become more resilient and also need to prove their long-term value creation to other shareholders, because this gives them a license to operate. So the impacts they have on different stakeholders create dependencies for the value they create for themselves. Excuse me. And a chance of future success. As you can see, for example, COVID-19, banks are increasingly expected to demonstrate what they do to rebuild societies. So what is impact? I think it's good to have a clear understanding of that and what we actually mean by that. We generally use this practical definition. So the impact is a difference one makes in the world by having an effect on the things that are valued in society. Right. And this definition consists of three elements that I'd like to point out. One is impact's about having an effect. So this is not about intentions or outputs. Megan mentioned that as one of the shortcomings of ESG ratings. But it's about the actual effect and the actual outcome that you as a bank have with your activities, right? And this is about direct and indirect impact. So direct impact are the impacts that you have within your own operations. But a bank, of course, has multiple clients, and these clients have clients and suppliers. So the value chain of a bank can be very interconnected and complicated, which also means that the overall impact of a bank in society can be large. So this indirect impact should also be taken into account. The second element is the difference one makes. Right? If you want to determine the impact that you make with a particular business activity, i.e. giving a loan, you need to compare that to a situation where that activity does not happen. That's called a reference scenario. And we distinguish two types of impact in that respect. One is absolute impact, which means that the activity does not happen at all, so that the client does not receive the loan at all. But that's often a hypothetical situation because there's always a competitor that may be willing to provide that loan. So the difference that you make compared to the competitor giving the money to the client, that's what we call marginal impact. And the last element is the things that are valued in society. And this is about things that actually matter in society. And we, in our approach, we tend to express that through welfare. And welfare in our definition has two dimensions. One is well-being. So the gains and losses in well-being in society that are caused by an activity of the bank. And the second dimension is respect of rights. And you can think of, for example, emitting greenhouse gases, which breaches the basic rights of people to a clean environment. Right. So both the impacts and the effects can be positive or negative, which is very important. And the final point I'd like to make that the extent to which something is valued in society can be made explicit through evaluation of the actual effect. I will show that here in when we introduce the integrated profit and loss account. So this is the approach that's based on extensive research done by Impact Institute and also further developed based on practical implementation of clients. The IPNL, or integrated profit and loss account, is an extension of the traditional P&L account, basically in two steps. One is it extends the traditional P&L account by not just considering one single stakeholder, but by expanding that to include all stakeholders in society. So you can think of clients or society at large or employees or suppliers. And the second step is by extending that to consider different types of capitals. So in addition to financial capital, a bank also uses and produces manufactured capital, intellectual capital, natural, social, and human capital. And these six capitals are based on the global framework of the IIRC. It's a powerful application of, I think, impact measurement because it gives a complete and consistent overview of the impact that a bank has with its activities. And it's because all impacts are expressed in the same unit, they're also comparable. The IPNL, one slide back, clear is. So the IPNL account is complements and many impact measurement approaches around, for example, impact weighted accounts and UNEP-FI, and it also can be used to report under different other frameworks, like we have here on the right, like SDG, the triple bottom line, or the safe and just operating space. So why would we want to quantify value and aggregate impact? Well, Megan mentioned a number of ESG challenges. We've highlighted three of them here, like incomparability, bias, and the volume of metrics. So quantification of impacts can help with the comparability of different options. So, but to meaningfully compare, so say, a lot of carbon or a modest amount of carbon between two companies, you would like to quantify what it actually is to be able to make a decision around that. Valuation is useful for meaningfully comparing different types of impacts. So if you would like to decide between biodiversity impact and job creation, you can only do that if you express those in the same unit to get an understanding of how big the impact is for those two types of impact. For the IPNL account, we use a monetary unit, like a dollar amount or a euro amount. And finally, aggregation. And this is often overlooked in impact measurement evaluation approaches, but it's very relevant, in particular for banks who have complicated and interconnected value chains. So the direct impact and the indirect impact can be aggregated in such a way that banks do not end up with like hundreds of metrics because clients are located in different sectors in different countries around the world, and they have suppliers in different sectors and companies around the world. So aggregation is important to make proper decisions, but the level of aggregation is also important, so you don't end up in one single number. So it's a balance between those two. I think one of the, as I mentioned a couple of times, banks' largest impacts are often outside of their own operations. So clients can have complicated value chains, but with multiple suppliers and multiple clients in different sectors and in different countries. So the challenge is how do you get the impact data to actually do the impact measurement and valuation. So the IPNL method is based on, uses the Global Impact Database for this, which is a database that's been developed by Impact Institute. And the GID database uses global trade and impact data to estimate the impact associated with activities in different countries and sectors. And you can use that as an initial estimate of what the impact is of your bank, its activities, both in a direct and an indirect way. So this is a very high level overview of IPNL, how it works and why we believe it provides more meaningful information. The methodology and approach can be implemented and embraced in different ways, and we would like to show that through 2 case studies, one for DBS and one for ABN AMRO. Back to you, Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Arjen, and also thanks for doing the handover already. I really wanted to take some questions at this point. I also saw that some questions from Megan and Arjen came in, but we don't have so much time. But what we can do is promise you that you will get an answer anyway. I already heard from Tjeerd that he can address parts of these questions within his own presentation. Thank you so much, Tjeerd. Would you also like to come in and tell us about the impact journey that we, well, I was not really part of it, but you were. I think that there was a lot of things going on at ABN AMRO when you came up with this idea. Tell us about it.
Thanks, Yvonne. Is my sound okay? Just to check.
Yes, it's perfect.
Thanks. Okay, welcome everybody also on my behalf, and great to be here and share the ABN AMRO story on IPNL and impact reporting. So on the next slide, you see we didn't start just last year or 2 years ago. We actually started back in 2013 or 2014 with some very small pilot studies for the bank on diamonds, the true price of diamonds, the effects on the cacao trade. And we did an extensive study on the IPNL for our mortgage portfolio. And these were all smaller, more quantitative studies. And then in 2018, we decided to go for it and do a complete monetized IPNL in our first impact report, our 2018 impact report. We did an IPNL before in 2014 and 16 as well. But as I said, that was very quantitative and qualitative, and now we wanted to put the numbers to it. And one of the questions in the chat is the challenge of monetization in the approach of IPNL, and I fully agree. But as we are in banking, I think the monetization really helps to put the numbers into perspective. There is, of course, a downside that you need to avoid, giving the impression that it is very accurate. So you need to use some wider ranges sometimes to express the impacts in euros or dollars, but it is doable, and I'll share some examples later on. Now, what was really helpful is that we got some external awards or praise actually on this journey, because it's not an easy journey, and it's not well, it helps then to get some external recognition on your efforts. And last year we were able to, with our 2019 impact report, we were able to actually embed some of these impacts into our integrated report and have assurance on the numbers that we included there. Now on the next slide, you see a summary of our impact and of our IPNL. So let's go to the next slide, please. Thanks. And as mentioned before, we use the 6 capital models of the IRC, and we have identified 4 stakeholder groups that are most relevant for ABN AMRO. And on the right on this slide, you see a summary of the impacts, and you also see the ranges that I referred to earlier with regards to impact. So it's a relatively wide range, and to avoid giving the impression that this is very accurate, especially once you start adding up various impacts on various capitals or per stakeholder. You really need to avoid the addition trap there, because once you start adding them up, it kind of loses all its value. So this gives an impression of where the biggest impacts are for the bank, and in which capitals and for which stakeholder, and whether they are positive or negative. So gray ones are negative, green ones are positive. Next slide, please. And I think this slide is typical for banking, and most of us will know this, but it's good to put it into a picture and to put it into perspective as well. Where are our biggest external costs in which part of our value chain? And a focus when we started off with this sustainability journey or impact journey years ago, a lot of focus also within ABN AMRO was on our own operations. And that's fine as a starting point, that's great. But from an impact perspective, of course, we need to look at our clients, both up and downstream. And most impact we have through our financing activities, so downstream, funding our clients, and actually we create some external negative impacts on natural capital. And on the next slide, we'll give you some more detail on that. And see and also share some examples. So what I won't go through all of them, but just to give you some perspective, if we look at cybercrime, that is a negative impact on intellectual capital, and it affects a wide range of our stakeholders, not only our clients but also society at large. If we look at human capital, you could say in our own operations we need to be aware of the health and safety of our employees, but also safety issues with our clients. So if we finance clients and they don't take the well-being of their employees seriously, then we will have a negative or we will create external costs there. Of course, the biggest one is on natural capital. As I said before, we have a relatively large corporate and institutional banking portfolio, but also through our mortgage portfolio, which is really large, we have a negative effect on climate. Next slide, please. The link to the Sustainable Development Goals is extremely relevant. Herman in his introduction mentioned the important year 2015 when they were introduced, and the relevance of the banking or the financial sector to contribute to these. Now, what is interesting about this slide, and also from an internal perspective within ABN AMRO, is that we try to talk about these SDGs in terms of positive impact, while actually we are operating on both sides of the scale here. So we create a negative impact on SDG 13 and a relatively positive impact on SDG 8. And by having this clear picture, we can address both sides of this coin and try and reduce our negative impact on 8, 12, and 13, but also try to improve our positive impact on all these SDGs as well. And in our impact report, we actually addressed all 17 SDGs, but we found that these 3 are most impacted by ABN AMRO's operations in our total value chain. Yeah, thanks. We can skip we can go to this last slide, because this to me has been for years the guiding slide. This is representative of our total journey on impact reporting and the relevance that it has for our stakeholders, both internal and external. So we've spent time and energy on measuring the value creation and the impact that we have on all our stakeholders. We've started the journey of reporting on that value creation, and all that is very interesting and important stuff to do. The challenge is actually in the third step. how can we steer our value creation the right direction? So how can we use these insights in the right way so that we can base our decisions and improve our decision making within the bank using impacts, both positive and negative, in our decisions. And if we are able to do that, and we see the first signs of doing that, and that is really interesting to study and to improve on, then we can actually grow the pie, as Adrian said, and create more positive and less negative impact in our total value chain. And this is, for me, how we can make long-term value creation actionable. And that is the point of this exercise and of all this work. It's not just to demonstrate where our impacts are, but to actually make them actionable and give ourselves the opportunity to steer on this value creation. It's been a great journey so far. I think Mikkel will be next and share his journey. But I'll hand it back to Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Gerd. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. Also, especially the last ones is easy to grasp. I do see that there are some questions about how to monetize value. So let's get back to that when we have the Q&A in a bit. Also, I got a question about if you could tell a little bit more about the Cocoa Trade pilot project, which probably will exceed this frame of today, but maybe you can promise us to get back here to the participants on that, maybe in the email that we send later.
Or maybe in 1 minute, Yvonne, because all these studies are online, which is also, I forgot to mention, but on the abnamro.com website, we'll share the link afterwards. Everything that we did so far is publicly available online on the website.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mikkel. Mikkel, I know that Impact Institute and you guys are also working on how Adrian said, getting from A to B. I hope you're in the call yet, because I know you came in later. Yes.
I am on the call.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I was actually a bit disappointed with Chair's answer, his expertise in cocoa, but never mind, we'll get that from him another day. Anyway, for those of you DBS, we are a commercial bank, largest in Southeast Asia, but we were born as the development bank of Singapore before we became a full-blown commercial entity. And that has somehow an impact on why we chose to do impact measurement. So on the next slide, one of the things that our CEO often talks about is about having a positive impact on the society or being a company of purpose. But these days, everybody talks about being a company of purpose and having a positive impact. So if you really want to be true to that, it obviously starts with having some way of identifying what are your impacts, and has to go above and beyond just simply talking generically about knowing that you have a negative impact on the climate. You somehow have to be able to weigh these things. And that was what led us down the path of impact measurement and Impact Institute. But before I get to that, let me go to the next slide and tell you that when we were starting to get to this, we couldn't just take in everything at once. Impact measurement is, as some of you already grasped, fairly large undertaking. So we too wanted to focus on where we had the most positive or negative impact. And we think of ourselves in terms of sustainability or operations in 3 pillars. 1, responsible banking, what we do with our clients. 2, responsible practices, how we operate ourselves. And 3, how we create social impact above and beyond what we do in the other pillars. So clearly as a bank, we have most impact, positive or negative, in responsible banking. And so we decided to get started on this and be able to steer. We wanted to focus on our lending businesses, and more specifically on our institutional banking business, because that's the largest part of our business. So on the next slide. So what we decided to do was to focus first and foremost on 2 industries. And again, these studies are available online. Before I talk about the studies, let me explain why we really wanted to do impact measurement with Impact Institute. Before we ended up in this approach, we looked at all the frameworks that are out there, and I'm sure many of you have done that as well. You'll be mindful that if you count them all up, you'll probably get to a couple of hundreds of them. So it's a bit of a nightmare to try and figure out what to do. But I realized that for all of them, it didn't satisfy what we wanted to do, because we wanted the rigor that goes behind the ability to dollarize these things. We needed this to be based on solid and provable science. And we needed to be able to quantify so we could see the size of each thing. And banks have a particular data problem, because while other types of corporates can just look at their own value chains, and that's difficult enough, the impact that we make through our lending is, of course, a derivative of the impact that our corporate clients make. So you can't, unless you want to go and ask every single client to do impact measurement, you're going to struggle with data problems. And this is where Impact Institute was able to help us. So when we undertook these studies, what were we trying to do with it? We were trying to do a couple of things. One, we wanted to be able to understand and use this as a way of engaging whether we should be in an industry at all. So the whole idea around, if you are, for example, in palm oil, intuitively, we all know that there's negative environmental impact and there's some positive social or economic impacts. But how do you weigh these things up? And secondly, and equally important, we wanted to eventually be able to use this as an instrument of steering. So we needed to be able to know what kind of levers do we have available to us so that we could reduce the negative impact and increase the positive impact. And we chose two studies for that are relevant to us. One is palm oil, not because it's the largest part of our business, but because it's an area that everybody is talking about it. It's something that we do lend to. It's very important for Southeast Asia, as you probably know. And because it just lends itself well to a study because it has so many different impacts. And secondly, the automobile industry. One, because it's big, and two, because we see a shift, as you all know, as we go to a low carbon economy. So we wanted to understand what is that shift and how can we be a positive force in that. So on the next slide. So when we look first at the automotive industry, as you can see on this slide here, we did learn quite a bit. We learned that, first of all, there are negative environmental impact of producing a car, and that should come as no surprise to all of us. But there's also significant benefits in terms of consumer surplus in these types of things. But when you compare them between a traditional vehicle and an electrical vehicle, which we've done here on the left-hand side, what you will see is that you can actually significantly reduce the negative impacts, both social and environmental, while retaining the positive impact that is generated to the consumer. In fact, the positive impact stays almost intact, while the negative externalities are reduced significantly. And that, again, intuitively, we would probably all know, but here we quantified. And we focused only on one part of the manufacturing process, but still, this allows us to understand just how much you can do by engaging our clients and changing the production line. But we learned more than that. We also learned that it mattered a lot. So next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, it matters a lot where the car is being produced. And so when you think about, okay, it's on the next slide again, never mind. Can we just go to the next slide for a second? Yes, thank you. It matters a lot where that car is being produced. Where if you're in a country, sorry, two down. Sorry, guys. If you're in a country where the energy mix is as it is in China, the value of producing electricity is obviously a lot less than if you're in Europe. So with that, it offered additional insight. It also told us how complicated the whole matter is. But at least this is a starting point for a journey where we can look at other levers. What can we do in terms of our lending policies? This gave us the first insight into the industry in a quantifiable way. And we can then start to adjust some of our levers for lending and see what the impact will be on each one of them. If you go back up one slide. Similarly, when we looked at the palm oil industry, what we saw, again, to no surprise, is that there is a lot of value to consumers. But again, especially the environmental impact was quite negative. But what was also interesting to see was, and on the right-hand side here, that the negative externalities did not just arise from the company we lend to itself, but up and down the value chains. And what it tells us is that even if we have no pit, no deforestation, or other criteria for our lending, we still have, under this methodology, not eliminated completely, for example, child labor, because there's child labor other places in the value chain. And that tells you that if you really want to be comprehensive about this, you gotta take action all the way up and down the value chain. And that leads me to my last comment. When you listen to what I told you and what Chair told you, then you might start to think that this sounds horribly complicated. You might think it's a bit of a black box. And I can understand if you think like that. But what we did a couple of things to make sure that this was more than just black box magic. First of all, we had a university to go through meticulously the methodology and testify that it was sound and robust, and it's also on our website. But we also reached out, once we completed the studies, to NGOs, to our investors, and to many other stakeholders group, and just tried to articulate to them what we've been trying to do. And although inevitably it takes some getting used to understanding the methodology, we found that we can actually have a more sensible conversation with our stakeholders, be that NGOs, at least the friendly ones, and our other stakeholders, be them investors or even our employees. So that's what's get us excited about continuing this journey, and keep improving it until we know that we have the right levers to pull. So I'll just stop with that and hand it back over again. And if there are any questions for me later on, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Mikkel, for your insights. I encourage all of you also to ask some questions. We did get some in, so I think maybe it's just time to start with the Q&A now. A first question, actually it came up a couple of times, and I would like to address it to Arjen. Can all impact be translated into monetary value?
Yeah, I think we believe so. There is some people have a critique on monetizing impacts, and for the reason that you cannot put a price on, say, everything, say on a human life. And although we are very cautious on putting a price on something like that, and want to avoid to to all extent that positive and negative effects for a particular stakeholder are not netted in that way, we do believe that a single unit is helpful to be able to compare different impacts. And I also saw a question around how to monetize. I think this is quite a complicated question, and in the appendix of the report we will give you some bit more guidance. But it has to do with the two dimensions of the welfare that we use to classify different impacts, to the well-being and the respect of basic rights. And to give you a very simple example, the gain or loss in well-being can be measured or valued through, for example, what an individual is willing to pay for a particular product or service. And the dimension with respect to basic rights can, for example, be done by assessing the remedial cost for damage that has been done, say, for example, on climate change. So those are two examples of approaches how to value impacts. But I would like to refer to the appendix of the report that will be published today.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people will get an extensive answer there. I have another question for Tjeerd. Hope you're still there. Has the impact measurement exercise resulted in changes to the dashboard and KPIs? That's the first question. And second one, relating to that, does management's emphasis on these indicators reflect the magnitude of the value creation and the level of control ABN AMRO has on this?
Yeah, great questions. Thanks for that. So on the first one, this relates to the report steer slide that I showed. It definitely influenced the way that we think around KPIs steering of the company. It's not a one-on-one correlation, but it influences because we have more insights on where we actually have an impact. And the second part of the question, that relates to the actual steering of the company. So is it effective to steer on impact? And what I found is that always on a more qualitative level, we are always in agreement. Or for the most part, we agree on where our impacts are and how we can influence them. Once you start quantifying it and monetizing it, sometimes it kind of differs from that debate. So sometimes the debate is more around the monetization, and that's not helpful. But as Arjan said before, and Mikel as well, the monetization does help, specifically within banking sector. So I would encourage to go for that. So it definitely helps.
Hey, and in terms of terminology, I just saw another question coming in. You use upstream and downstream. Why won't you just stick with input and output? Or
that's quite a technical question. Upstream and downstream is as far, well, it covers more than just inputs and outputs. But it's a bit of a technical debate, also related to outcomes and impacts and what people prefer. But I think upstream and downstream for value changes is best used.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair. I have one last question, actually goes to Megan about the ESGs. Megan, I hope you're still there. Maybe you could just call. Can you use ESGs as a base for impact valuation, or how do you integrate it into your current processes?
Yeah, I think that you can. I mean, as I said, there's different ways to measure and report on ESGs, and so it depends a little bit on which metrics are being considered and how they're considered. But some of the more sort of advanced metrics look at maybe the volume of CO2 emissions, and those are quite easy to translate right into impact and then to value them. Others might take a little bit more understanding of and like mapping of which stakeholders are affected by the policy, by the policy, for example, the activity, and then understanding the way in which those stakeholders are affected. But in general, yes, I think they can be a useful baseline, but a bit more work will need to be done to extend them to impact.
Okay, but there's nothing holding anyone back to just give it a go. That's
indeed, please do.
Okay, then I would like to hand back to Arjan. You have a small summary for us for today, so we could actually wrap this up nicely. Arjan, can you come in?
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. I think we have a handful of minutes left. Yeah, I hope in this webinar we've been giving you an overview of the key elements of impact measurement evaluation for banks and how that can be done through the IPNL methodology. As we've seen that although the journeys for ABN and DBS have been different themselves, I think the underlying methodology and the overall aim are the same. Right? They want to steer their business and their clients' business towards sustainability, and they use the information to make better decisions and to optimize trade-offs between impacts on different stakeholders. I think one other final thing to mention is worth mentioning is the quantification of the externalities. So in particular, the role of the banks by providing financing solutions to different companies. Impact can also help to internalize these externalities over time externalities who may over time cause costs to increase, if you think about climate change, for example. Yeah, and I think if banks continue to improve their impact, I think they will contribute to transforming our economy to a more resilient and sustainable economy and society. I think that's what Herman is trying to achieve at the end. And finally, I'm very excited to take the opportunity to announce the launch of a working group that we have established together with Mikkel and Tjeerd from DBS and ABN AMRO, and Christina from Danske Bank, together with Rob Zakowski from Harvard Business School, the Impact Weighted Accounting Initiative. I think one of the key things that's important is to have an industry standard when it comes to impact measurement evaluation that's comparable across banks. And the objective of the working group is to share expertise, learnings, find a common ground, and also to create like a long-term vision for how impact measurement evaluation can be scaled up within the sector. So for anyone who's joined this webinar, if you think your organization is interested in joining, please let us know, because the more the better, and the bigger the impact will be of that working group as well.
Thank you so much, Arjen. And yeah, well, please join the working group. And thank you so much for participating today in our webinar. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, and I hope that you also saw something that you can work on. So thank you so much. Also, I want to address your attention, last thing, towards the publications that we talked about. Please have a look at them. And please also, well, once you join the working group, you join the crew. So then you also see that we do have more webinars like this that are more in-depth on this topic. So please stay tuned for that as well. Thank you so much, Arjen, Impact Institute team, and all the speakers and you participants, and have a great day. Thank you so much.